Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ARC 401B, Architectural Design Studio 6 at Uzagi University, Faculty of Architecture and Design. Today, we are hosting a lecture given by Hassan Serjan Salam about the history of Galata, Pera, Beyoğlu, Karakoy, the way you want to call it. Please welcome Hassan for being here today with us. Hassan Serjan Salam completed his Bachelor in Urban and Regional Planning at Istanbul Technical University and has a Master in Conservation and Regeneration in the University of Sheffield, UK. His PhD in Preservation of the Architectural Heritage was at Politecnico of Milano. He is also Associate Professor in Architecture in Turkey, has been a member of the Adramiteion Archaeological Field Surveys and Excavation Mission, is also part of INOS, NISA, and Anaya Excavation. He has been, until recently, a postdoctoral fellow at Kadir Has University, Istanbul, and then Koç University Research Center for Anatolian Civilization, while working as a part-time lecturer also at Mediaeval University, Faculty of Fine Arts and Design. He most recently worked as a postdoctoral researcher at CESCM, that's the Research Center in France at Poitiers, for the ERC Graph East project, which is related to Galata. His research interests are urban history, architectural heritage, and urban archaeology. So thank you very much, Serjan, for being with us today. And you can take as much time you want. I would not go over 1 hour, or if you do, we can have a short break. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you see my screen? Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for the kind invitation and introduction. So this morning, my presentation is entitled, as you see, Medieval Urban Palimpsest of Galata, Pera. And as you all know, Galata is located on the other side of the historical peninsula part of Istanbul and across the Golden Horn, and currently in Beyoğlu district as of the present day. And we'll talk about its Genoese history and during the late medieval period, when the Republic of Genoa, as just any other Italian city-state, established a trade network along the Mediterranean, Aegean, as well as the Black Sea coasts, where Galata was just another commercial outpost of this former Italian city-state based in Genoa in northwest Italy, known as the Genoese. And their commercial setup in today's Galata was directly related to the Fourth Crusade, when the Latins invaded the Byzantine territories, including the conquest of Constantinople, and the Latin Empire was established. However, some part of the Byzantine territories survived, and they wished to retake Constantinople and re-establish the Byzantine Empire. So for that purpose, they were allied with the Genoese against the Latin Empire, the Byzantines. And this happened in 1261. However, soon afterwards, the Constantinople was retaken from the Latins by the Byzantines with the promised help of the Genoese. And the Genoese commercial quarter was established in Constantinople, which was a part of the alliance signed in 1261 between the parties. However, there were some political struggles between the Byzantines and the Genoese, and their military cooperation was not that productive at that time. And even for a short period, they were exiled from Constantinople because the governor of the Genoese in Constantinople tried to hand over the city again to the Latins, etc. So many political struggles. However, they agreed once again in 1267 and were welcomed again to the capital, but not to the historical peninsula, but this time to Galata, probably as a security measure on the other side of the Golden Horn. So 1267 was the date when the Genoese officially allowed to move in Galata. And they established a commercial settlement there, officially called Pera, coming from the name being on the other side, Peran, across. And of course, the diplomacy continued even afterwards. So that famous Treaty of Nymphaeum was revalidated only in 1275, roughly 15 years later. And from archival documents concerning the later 13th century, we see large numbers of houses, some certain churches, a hospital, and civil properties in Pera. So we see how daily life worked in the Genoese commercial colony. And it was so productive and so busy that even their arch rivals, Venetians, attacked it in 1296 because it did not have any security at that time. And this was the turning point of the security of Pera. However, even though the Genoese requested to secure their colony, even its precise limits, its borders, other than like Galata speaking generally, was defined for the first time in May 1303 by the Byzantine emperor. So according to this decree by the Byzantine emperor, the Genoese commercial establishment started towards the west near the old dock, and it climbed north, reached a certain vineyard, and then turned east by passing further vineyards and some Byzantine churches. And reaching an eastern point, it made a very characteristic zigzag movement, as you can see, to bypass two more Byzantine churches. And then it continued south until reaching the coast again, some distance from the castle next to the Bosphorus. And then following the coastline, it reached the starting point again, where is slightly before the old dock, as you can see on the sketch. And there were some mapping attempts of this rough, sketchy borders of the first Genoese colony in Galata. However, it was not precise, even though it's been precisely determined by the emperor. And there were some problems concerning the monuments mentioned as references, as landmarks by following the border, and its application to the current urban layout of the Galata suburb and its relation with the urban morphology. But we can make it even more precise if we just pay attention to some former monuments of the area. For instance, we know from historical records in advance that San Francesco and Sant'Anna were two shrines of the colony within the Franciscan monastery. And during the late 17th century, during like way afterwards, during the Ottoman period, it was replaced by Yeni Mosque, Yeni Cami, in Galata. And from historical maps and panoramas, we know how the mosque and its shape was before it was demolished for the Bazaar of Ironmongers, Hırdavatçılar Çarşısı, where the shops followed the layout of the rectangular mosque, which directed towards Mecca, roughly towards the southeast, as we know. But this was the plot of a former Franciscan monastery with two churches and a convent remained from the Genoese period, and its history goes back as early as the 14th century. And this monument, even though it was built during the Ottoman period, represented the Franciscan convent and its major church, San Francisco. On mapping attempts, as you can see, it was labeled as San Francisco, but it was actually the shape of the mosque itself from the Ottoman period. But in the Propaganda Fide archives in Rome, we can find further evidence about how the Franciscan convent was before its demolition during the late 17th century for that Yeni Mosque. And you can see Sant'Anna and San Francisco here, and the male and female convent and the garden within the Franciscan convent. And a very characteristic upside-down L-shaped plot. So I think we can apply this plot perfectly to the current urban morphology of Galata. And we have even more detailed plans from Propaganda Fide archives in Rome, where San Francisco is located here and Sant'Anna is located here, two convents and the garden here, again in that upside-down L-shaped plot. And after the fire, which resulted the capture of the area from the Franciscans and the construction of the mosque. And if we just superpose this plot on top of the current layout of Galata, its precise position, we see how Sant'Anna and San Francisco corresponded to the area where the mosque was replaced by the mosque, as we see the situation as of the beginning of the 20th century. So obviously they correspond the eastern border of the delimitation, namely Anargyroi and Nikolaos churches from the Byzantine period, replaced by Sant'Anna and San Francisco of the Franciscan convent, and then Yeni Mosque during the Ottoman period. So while we detect this precise treble of the area, we can also determine the border of the first concession zone by the beginning of the 14th century. And soon afterwards, of course, this was just the determination of the area, but no proper security measures. The Genoese demanded some more, such as a moat and a larger area where it was completed to a rectangle, and now included 3 churches, which were not included a year before. And they were allowed to have some strong civil buildings, but no castle walls. And now we can see how it's been expanded slightly northwards, where now it includes 3 churches, which were excluded in 1303. And soon afterwards, since they were allowed to have strong houses, civil buildings, according to the Byzantine historians at that time, the Genoese built a long row of magnificent houses all along the border, followed by walls and moats, and had even illegal annexations through north. And here we see how those 3 churches, like Aia Irene, Anargyroi, and Nikolaos, within this zigzag shape in the east, were now included towards north, and the area was complete to a rectangle. And those magnificent row of tower houses were built along the coastline and then surrounded with a moat just a year afterwards, and then filled with walls, and they were linked, and they had some illegal annexations towards the hilltop. And even though most parts of the Galata walls were demolished as a part of new urban development during the later 19th century, we still have some parts of them. And concerning your project area, especially number A to F of 1 might correspond, so perhaps pay attention to them. So it can be like a thematic part of your design process. And it shows from those like 1A to 1F, they are trapped between later buildings of 19th and 20th centuries, but they're still visible between plots, and they have even some phases where a wall was later heightened with blind arcades from the rear to allow the sentry to move along on top of the wall. And those blind arches can still be seen again inside buildings and outside and between plots here and there. And since modern buildings occupied both inside and outside, the wall that formerly defended the coastline of the Pera colony, literally trapped between the later buildings. But we still can detect not only wall fragments, but even towers, which were those magnificent tower houses that were first initiated as strong civil buildings by the Genoese, but they obviously intended to construct proper towers to defend their area after the disastrous Venetian attack. And those are the western section of the first concession zone of Pera towards Azapkape area, and again the further sections of the coastal area where you can see the phases of the walls not only can be noticed by different arts, but even the masonry characteristics. So they did not build at once, like the tower came first, and then the walls linked them, and even the walls were later elevated. So there were multiple phases to defend this colony. And most of those security measures and defensive constructions were commemorated by those wall slabs with some heraldic devices, as the flag of Genoa, like the flag of the Byzantine Empire, and some noble Genoese families. So we know from these mural inscriptions and the slabs and with shields when those constructions happened and which phases they had. And of course, the enlargement of the Genoese colony continued even after 1303 and 1304. So we know that they were already having some illegal annexations towards north, and after a disastrous fire in 1315, a year later in 1316, they allowed to have a narrow strip of land towards north, right outside their colony at that time, and including some houses on that strip of land, which included the new municipal palace of the colony, Palazzo Comunale, communal palace, today called Bereket Han. You see how it looked like by the late 19th century. And we can find this building from some old panoramas of Istanbul. But it had some transformations over time. Its front facade was later cut and rebuilt when the street was enlarged. But of course, it's one of the most significant landmarks from the Genoese period as a civil building this time. But it's in pretty bad shape because of numerous alterations starting from the 19th century. And if you pay attention to this narrow strip of land right outside the first concession zone with two major enlargements like 1303 and 1304, and now the concession of 1316 comes towards the hilltop with the communal palace here. So the urban morphology gives us the trace, and coming from the textual sources, they perfectly correspond to each other. And of course, these constructions work also continued to secure this new area, and even towards the north, complete the area into a triangle, which will end with the Galata Tower. And when the Genoese were unable to build proper walls, they built palisades instead to quickly surround those areas and include into their colony. And those works were commemorated by those lapidary artifacts again, slabs and shells with inscriptions, and those coats of arms represented all those different defensive works. And the Byzantine written sources provide many details about those numerous phases of Genoese defensive works in Galata. That includes the famous Galata Tower, built in 1348 on top of the hill, guarding the colony against landward threats. And as a secondary function, it served as a watchtower. And from that phase as well, we have some sections remained, such as the two semicircular towers towards the hill and the famous Galata Tower itself. But even though when we look at the Galata Tower, we see mostly its top part, only the 1/3 of the tower is originally from the Genoese period, which is thicker and has a tunnel-shaped stairway, where the Ottoman part has like thinner walls and the spiral wooden stairs. And of course, very different brick and material characteristics as well. But Genoese, the authentic Genoese part of the Galata Tower is towards the bottom and demarked by some brick bands where numerous earthquakes and fires damaged the tower, and of course it needed to be reconstructed again and again during the Ottoman period. So it's a very famous Genoese monument, but it's only very partial Genoese. And even though with the Galata Tower, let's say, that triangular area until the hilltop was occupied, the concessions continued, especially after the Battle of the Bosphorus, where the Byzantines lost, and they needed to give some further area to the Genoese in Pera, now included towards the east and also the west. So lateral expansion began for the Pera colony. And if we just pay attention to the details of this new concession of May 1352, it reached until the castle, which was defined in May 1303. So it follows a typology of monuments already mentioned in the area. And the castle was soon occupied by the Genoese as well, and they added to this Byzantine castle, which protected the Golden Horn at Constantinople, but now with a tower built in 1391 according to archival sources, and it was strengthened against further attacks from the Venetians, from the Catalans. They all created problems to the Genoese in the seas, and that's why the colony was under threat. And we can see from panoramas, not only from the Byzantine period, but also from the Ottoman period, how that Tower of Holy Cross looked like as an addition to an existing early Byzantine castle next to the coast. And towards this eastern suburb, formerly Argyropolis during the Byzantine period, and in the Genoese archival sources with its slightly Latinized form, Lagirio or Largirio from Argyropolis, defensive works were extended from the core Pera area, which were occupied since the very beginning until the construction of the Galata Tower in 1348. And again, from mural slabs with coats of arms and inscriptions, we can precisely follow how this eastern suburb was defended. And it started with at that time it was called like Santa Maria, and then occupied by the Benedictines and became like San Benedetto, the famous French high school Saint Benoit. And it was also occupied during the Genoese period. And those lapidary artifacts were actually coming from this area. So during the Genoese period, first the church enclosure was fortified and then became a part of the urban defense system throughout the 14th and 15th centuries in this eastern borough, eastern neighborhood of the Pera colony called Lagirio. And of course, from the remaining sections, we have some parts from this phase as well, including a tower now in the courtyard of Saint Benoit. And of course, the castle itself, which is originally an early Byzantine building, but it was occupied by the Genoese. And added with a new tower, and even more formidable. And its masonry includes many ancient spolia, reused construction materials of much older ages of Galata area from the Byzantine and even Roman periods. And finally, since a certain part of this eastern suburb was already given to the Genoese in 1352, it was now extended until Topane, far the limit of the area, with an official edict in August 1376, and defensive works continued. This Byzantine edict by the emperor. So the whole area until the Topane now became a part of the Pera colony, which started in the very beginning of the 14th century with its delimitation, have reached the extreme eastern point, which corresponds to today's Topane area. And you see a very much larger area included in August 1376. And as I said before, even though proper masonry walls and towers defended those areas, because of material shortages and of course limited time, manpower in a distant colony, the Genoese first built palisades, some wooden frameworks, like Roman castrum, and then replaced by masonry works, step by step. And from this eastern part, we have especially some ruined tower around Topane area, and then in the western part until the Haliç shipyards, today's Azapkap area, where the metro bridge crosses Galata and even the walls themselves directly. We have this section of wall, again, as a part of the Genoese defense system of Pera colony, and from the late 14th century, as we know from mural inscriptions and coats of arms, precisely dating to this period and giving us details about those work, from which they were done and how. So it's easy to imagine all those dates written in black are coming from the mural inscriptions of those numerous phases of defensive works, and the orange represent the territorial concessions that we tried to discuss in short. And once again, concerning the remaining sections of these, not only eastern, but also the western part, until Haliç shipyards of today, which were mentioned already in May 1303 as the old dockyard. So there is also a spatial continuity for that western area as well in Haliç. In the Azapkapı area, we have some more wall sections that remained from the 1430s, according to the mural slabs from the Genoese period, and that one of them is still on top of the wall that is visible and giving the date of this section, which had many alterations over time and demolitions throughout the Ottoman period. But we can still trace those remnants in your project area and elsewhere in Galata, still with some mural slabs. And this is the last phase of the defensive works, which ended in 1452, just a year before the conquest of Constantinople, including Pera, which surrendered as a part of the siege of the Ottomans. And if we just pay attention to some old photographs and slabs which are still on display in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, we can detect their positions before their demolitions for new urban development, how they were positioned on top of the towers. If you just pay attention to those black and white photographs. And they were visible from both inside, outside, and also the guard walking on top of the wall. So they were like very visible, and they were very strong image of the visual identity of the Genoese in the Pera colony. And also giving us many details about the urban archaeology and architectural history. And this is how the defensive system of Pera looked like after its completion in the mid-15th century, including many territorial concessions and gradual improvements with walls and towers and subsections. And this is the ruined tower around Topan area, now used as a cafe. And this is the semicircular barbican that surrounds the Galata tower. And it provided further security against cannon attacks, which aimed lower parts of the tower, which was a new technology when compared to portion artillery, such as Managal's trebuchet, which directed upper parts of the tower. So we see also the change of the warfare techniques and military technology. And we mentioned San Francisco in short as a Franciscan convent, but we also had a Dominican convent, and it actually still exists as the Arab mosque. And from archival sources, we can trace its history in the beginning of the 14th century as another civil religious landmark of the colony, like the communal palace, like other churches, but it's still in use as Arab mosque when it was converted by the Ottomans after the conquest as a part of the siege of Constantinople. And like the walls themselves, also this perch from the Genoese period with very characteristic Gothic architectural features also had numerous alterations and modifications by the Ottomans, but we still can see its characteristic details today. And its masonry also represents this longue durée architectural life with different masonry techniques, materials that we can detect. So even though we do not have the mural inscriptions like we had for the walls, a part of the defensive system of the Pera, the material itself already represents the long life of this monument, starting from the Byzantine period as Hagia Irene, then taken during the Genoese period, converted to a Dominican convent, and then Arab mosque, like the story of the Yeni Mosque from the Franciscan convent with Sant'Anna and San Francesco, and from the two Byzantine churches called Anargyroi and Nikolaos. So by position and by architecture, and from even an archaeological level, it is really possible to see all those layers on top of each other. And even the Ottoman repairs, as you can see, re-employed the Gothic frames, which were recut and reused by the Ottomans on the same place. The Genoese mural slabs, stones, were used by the Ottomans on the same building, on the Arab mosque. So the building repeats itself in some ways. And as I said, the ribbed groin vaults with frescoes, also important testimony from the Genoese period in Arab mosque today. And we can see such examples elsewhere in Galata, where Ottoman mosques and small mosques actually occupied places of the Genoese period churches, and those Genoese period churches were established on places of some former Byzantine churches. It's the continuity of the function and the sacred space. But even from civil architecture, we have some minor examples, such as this Genoese hall right across the Arab mosque, where it used some early Byzantine stone capitals on top and above, and very similar to the Galata castle, where an early Byzantine castle used late antique construction materials. So these are all like major and minor examples of how a city has continuity and transformation in archaeological and architectural levels. So that's why I chose the title of Palimpsest for the presentation this morning, where the parchment was like a very valuable material back in time. And when a text inscribed on it was no longer useful or needed, it was erased, but not fully erased, and then rewritten with a new text under certain conditions. Older text is also visible together with a new text, so it creates a palimpsest where the parchment, the paper, the papyrus has different layers of texts from different times, which is a palimpsest. So the cities are. So even though we have like a new visible layer as of the present day, if we just pay attention a little bit under certain circumstances, we can still see the older layers of the city, like I tried to explain. And this was the Byzantine Galata, right before like the major construction work of the Genoese. Even though they arrived the area 1267, the 14th century witnessed most of the defensive and civil constructions. So this is how a Byzantine suburb appeared by the late Byzantine period during the Paleologan era, and how the Genoese converted it into an overseas trade colony in 2 centuries, and how the Ottomans took and had their own layer, and the Republican period as well. So they're all on top of each other. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions or comments, more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your illuminating presentation about the formation process of Galata. Let's see if we have any questions from the students or from those who are online. No, there's nobody online. You got any question? Okay, I would like to make my own consideration. Now, it is clear, talk about form, you know, we got a hill here, right? Which is up over the top, where on top of the hill is the tower. Then we got a triangular shaped kind of fortification coming down, and then a rectangular one, which is the core, the urban core on the coast. Now, this, I'm going to share my screen and make a little note. So let's see if we can, let's put it all together and see if we can, I need to do a brownish color. So we got a hill, and then we got a hillside coming down like this, and running down to, it is the coast. But now this same configuration could be anywhere. And the shape of the fortification, I'm going to do that in red, is basically, you know, there's a tower here on the uppermost, and there's a triangular shape kind of enclosure. I'm just drawing the corner towers. And then there's another rectangular one like this, right? So the Canadian urban morphology approach would say the sequence is 1 and 2. Okay, on top of the ridge, we got the ridge road coming here, and for the fence, they settle on top over there, you know, with a castle or enclosure, and then they develop downhill. But it is clear that it is the other way around in Galata. Now, this is not so obvious, right? It is obvious if you look at history, but if you consider it with the eye of the morphologies, it's exactly the other way around. Now, the point is that this sequence in medieval town planning is always the other way around, or at least most times. Just to give you an example, I mean, there are many medieval towns that do have this very similar shape. This is the, you know, the one I could find right now, but I have in mind many other examples which I could not find right away in this short time, because this thought came about right now. So Pisignano, it is a very tiny borough, and you see the shape of the fortification, triangular. You have to turn this around, right? And that is the uppermost. If we can turn off some of these, I don't know if I can learn how to do this. Yes. So the triangular fortification at the uppermost triangle point, that is the, you know, the uphill. And then we got the square settlement, sorry, rectangular. There are so many of these. And we'll go back to the Zoom. Am I even sharing? I'm not sharing, sorry. Pisignano, there it goes. That's the uppermost triangle. And you have to understand that it goes uphill in that direction. That's the valley below, and that is the hill above. It's a very small example. But again, this is kind of a general idea. How would you defend the top of the hill? Putting the tower on top, coming down with the triangle. It's logic, right? And then how would you organize a settlement? You would have to have some kind of a grid and, you know, blocks, roads running more or less in the direction of the contour lines, and roads running in the other direction. But the point is here, the sequence. So that sequence, there you go, 1 and 2, it's wrong. It's the other way around, 1 and 2. And this is a general, how can you say, process of the formation process of medieval settlements. It always begins in the direction, this is in case of Galata, southwest, right? Either southwest or southeast, because that is the best direction you can have to, you know, build a settlement and have the sun. And let's say, usually it's 10th to 11th century. And then 13 to 14, the so-called incastellamento, that's an Italian word, which is adopted in British literature, incastellamento, which means encastlement. There is this phase, incastellamento, of history when they build a castle, you know, the feudal establishment. comes after. So these medieval towns with the castle on top, and you have probably some in mind, that's the collective imaginary, the castle on top of the hill, the village below. It is always the other way around. The village is built before, the castle is built afterwards. Not in Galata, but this is a different case. Not in Galata, but the castle is built afterwards in order to control those people who are living in the village, not the other way around. And if we want to move this, sequence, village, castle, not the other way around, to today, if you imagine of these refugee camps, there are many examples. I don't want to mention anything recent, but, refugee camps. And so that will be the village. And then you got the police station or the army barrack. That would be the castle, a military structure and control. You think the refugees would settle next to the police station? I don't think so. It would be the other way around. We got the refugee camp, and then later you go there to control those people with a military barrack or police station. The relationship between village and castle in medieval times is exactly the same. The village is where the people live, the castle is where the soldiers are. Anyhow, in Galata, it's exactly the sequence as we would expect. Starting from below, colony, settlement, and then the fortification going uphill. That's my comment. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your very wise comment. I think even though the Byzantines pushed the Genoese way too much to stop them building a fortification, their subconsciousness still wished to reach the point which you just described, and in the end we had the same scheme of the fortification, and that perfectly represents the same defensive logic of the medieval period. Thank you.
And the other comment I had in mind, in the meantime, Ludovica Gregori just came in from the University of Florence. She is a PhD student, visiting scholar at Ozegin University. If she can connect to the Zoom, she can introduce herself. The other thing is I'm going to do this in a different color, green. The moat that, and this buffered zone, we would call it today, buffered zone, dividing the colony of Galata from whatever was on the other side. So that's very interesting. Why would you ever build a buffer zone if you don't have someone else on the other side of the buffer zone you want to defend? So who was there? Sercan, you have an idea?
Oh, the Greeks. So the Byzantine suburb.
So it is clear, it is evident that before they built Galata here, someone else was living on the other side, and they had some issues. First they built the what do you call that in the documents? The row of fortified houses, right?
Exactly.
That is what is the purpose of that? To defend from those other people.
Yes.
And then the buffer zone and the moat. But those row houses built on that side are perhaps the first example, at least in documents in Galata, of the construction of row houses. And they are a line, a row, in order to form a fortification by being attached one to the other one. So we got the Greeks here.
And the Jews, again in the same area.
Greeks plus Jews, and that is before the Genoese came.
Exactly, way
and
before.
Then 1303, we got the Genoese here, and then they are enlarging, going upwards, extending. And yes. So that's all on my side. Anyone?